Thanks very much, Elise. So if the speakers could all come up to the stage, I've worded up a couple of guys to stand at the back, and we'll move on to the questions. So unfortunately, JB had to duck out as well to get back to work. So I apologise for JB not being here. So take a seat if you like, and we'll kick off. Okay, so the first question we have, well, you're the man with the mic, so we'll go straight to Ian. So, being a leader in the industry, how do you manage inbreeding and find external genetics to improve your herd? So it's really linking to that last one as well.
Okay, there's two questions there. So how do I manage inbreeding? Exactly what you saw in the mate cell. I call it Tinder for cows. It's a great tool to manage the inbreeding. So certainly I do that. I individually mate still as well, so that does it to some extent. While with genomics now, you could argue you could multi-sire join a bit more. With regards to finding new genetics, it's always a challenge when you're towards the top end of the index and you're trying to drive index to be finding more bulls. I certainly do it a lot internally through my, we've got a breeding program big enough to be bringing it through, and therefore you've got to manage that inbreeding. But having said that, I think genomics it's much easier now than 5 years ago, because genomics has actually identified animals, it's spread the EBVs and the dollar indexes that we actually can find more now than we used to. And particularly, if I'm looking overseas, I use the percentile table. I assume that the genetic populations are similar, and I use the percentile table to rate where I'm looking at the traits. So that probably answers that one.
Yeah, it's really good, and it helps kind of lead into the third question we have on the screen as well. So everyone's mentioned a bit of a balancing act that everyone tries to pull in managing traits that don't have breeding values with traits that do have breeding values. I must admit I'm a little bit scared of saying this phenotype versus breeding value, because breeding values are underpinned by phenotypes. So I don't think that distinction is such a great distinction. I would prefer if we try and think of it as ones that have breeding values, because they're still traits that we could record, versus ones that don't. So can you manage those traits that we don't have breeding values for in mate cell selection choices too? So leave that to you guys. Take a pick. Fight over it.
Well, I'll just make a quick comment on what we can do in mate cell. So there's an option in mate cell, and just bear with me for a moment, but it's called adding a custom trait to a run. So that's where if you have a value that's not routinely reported from sheep genetics, you can actually add it in as a custom trait to your run. And we do see people doing it with pole horn results in merinos at the moment, because we don't have that genomic trait in mate cell right now. The other thing I would encourage you to do, and I'm sure Elise agrees, is if you have groups of animals that you're not willing to join to each other, have that categorised beforehand. It does save a few runs. So, for example, in the pole horn example, if you don't want any, PHs going to a PH that could result in a HH progeny, making sure that we're grouping them effectively to avoid that from the get-go, rather than, poor Elise doing 4 or 5 runs before you then give her that information. Yeah.
So I had an example recently where a breeder who was using mate cell for the first time was still quite concerned about sheep type, and he had gone through and basically grouped the ewes into different lists for me and said, this list of ewes I only want to potentially go with ram A, B and C, for example, and this list of ewes I'm happy to go with ram A, D and E, for example. So we can actually put those into mate cell and really give it some rules around where it can draw matings from different sire and dam lists. So you can get quite complex. You can also put in some different, I can't remember the exact term for it, but it's almost like an end point or an objective. I don't know what the word is, Emma, but say if you had, a proportion of your ewes you wanted to go into a program that was breeding high eating quality traits, for example, and maybe you wanted to divert 20% of the matings into that enterprise, and then you could also allocate the rest of the ewes into a different sort of target. I'm not sure what the right terminology is.
End uses.
End use, of course. So you've also got that option there where you're not really defining that this ewe has a particular characteristic, but that I want the progeny to have certain characteristics. So that's another option.
So the top question was directed at JB, but I would like to open it up to the group a little, because it's a nice general question about custom indexes and managing relationships with potential clients. So maybe I'll kick off to Ian first and then to Matt. Have you ever gone down the path of making your own index? And have you ever tried to engage with your buyers to read an index that's different to the industry?
Yes, I have gone down the path of looking to customise an index, and when I did it, I probably did it about 10 years ago. And the thing is that once I looked at that index and correlated it to the existing Hereford indexes, they were so closely correlated, I felt that the effort to retrain your client base onto a new index and go through that extension process, I suppose, was too hard. But mind you, I'm still looking at it, and I'm considering at the moment that customising an index might be good for me at this stage. With regards to, you've definitely got to extend it onto your clients because it's for them, and the index has got to reflect, what they want out of their breeding programs and their breeding objectives. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, Matt, do you have any further things to add to that from a northern focus as well?
Not specifically northern, but I think just a couple of points. I kind of encourage just about everyone to go through the process of building an index. I think and Brad does not love this idea as much as I do, but it's a really good exercise to go through to understand your own production system, understand the markets that are providing the income to the system, and how that relates to the genetics that you need for that combination of production system and market. So I think it's a really good exercise for people to go through. I think it'd be a really good basis for educating breeders. And if it turns out that they're highly correlated with what's there already, that's fine. But in those few cases where things might be sufficiently different that animals are ranked differently, then it gives you a very targeted, powerful basis for selection in that unique situation.
Let's move to the next one because we have a bit of a time constraint. So I'll actually let's have a crack at the nice general final question, and I'll take the question from Jake there that it's not just to me, it's to the whole group. And if you guys could take it in turns to kind of answer this question. So if you could have a genomics result faster, cheaper, or adding more accuracy, which would you choose and why? And which is the least important to you? Now let's go around the group, take a minute to think about it. Faster, cheaper, or more accurate? Which would you choose and why? And which is the least important?
At this stage, I'll say the least important. I take my TSU genomic sample at birth, so the fastness is not important. I have plenty of time to be making those decisions based on that. To me, it's more accuracy. The better I can describe the genetics, the more important.
I absolutely agree with Ian. I think the real advantage we gain from genomics is improving selection accuracy, and if it takes a bit more time to achieve that, then so be it. I think cheaper will come with economies of scale. The more, as we get more genotyping in our industry, that cost will come down, and that'll happen as the number of SNPs we're analysing goes up. I think both of those things can happen at the same time.
I'll give a little bit of a different answer, and I suppose I'm partly answering on behalf of the feedback I hear from my clients. And I think genomics, we know, has really accelerated in uptake by merino breeders, but it's really stalling with maternals and terminals. And I think one of the barriers there is they're already collecting parentage, so they're not really utilising it for parentage. So for them, it's a cost factor. So I think if the cost could come down, and I expected it to have come down now that we have more service providers and more people already using the technology, and it hasn't really moved at all. So I think on behalf of my clients, I'd say cost.
So a bit more of a balance, so the cost, but still keep the same accuracy of a product. Yep. So not speed, but really the cost. Emma.
I'd just agree with what Elise said there. That's certainly the constant feedback we have is when we're going to have a $2 test. And the answer is normally probably not in my lifetime, but we'll get closer over time. And I mean, in the sheep space, we've just opened up to a more competitive genotyping market with more providers in that space too. So we're sort of really at the cusp of the industry being more competitive in that space.
It's a really nice contrast because we've got two people heavily involved in the beef industry and two people heavily involved in the sheep industry, and we have the sheep industry perspective. Is it that we want it cheaper, and the beef industry perspective we want it more accurate? So I don't know if that could be that general. I wouldn't be game to say that it's that general, because I'm sure there's people in the sheep industry that would like it more accurate, and vice versa in beef that would like it cheaper. So it's quite interesting that really faster didn't come up as the most important. And so I guess it's the one of the three to answer the question, which one would you leave out? And it appears to be the faster one from our speakers today. So with that, would you like to keep us answering the questions? Or we are getting very, very behind time. So it's really up to you guys. Are you feeling worn out by the looks of the crowd? Let's finish off. I would like everyone to keep those questions that they had put up in Slido, and please approach any of the speakers and chat about it over a coffee and over lunch. There's lunch packed at the back. Grab a box of lunch and discuss your questions with the given speakers. Finally, I'd like everyone to put their hands together for all of the speakers. It was a wonderful session, so thank you very much.